All right, so hi everybody. This is Mike Frankovich again. Kind of an interesting thing, this is a couple weeks ago. It was about a week and a half. I'm actually on YouTube just watching videos, like I'm sure everyone's doing, like you're doing right now. I'm calling you out. I'm calling you out. But yeah, I was like, just like you're doing right now. You're looking at videos on YouTube, and you get those recommended videos, and you look at it, and it looks pretty intriguing. So that's what I did. I clicked on one. It was about barn find muscle cars in Illinois. So I said, why not? Let's have a look. I just started watching it. It was a pretty lengthy video, and the guy's going through a basement of a building where they've got a bunch of these like vintage muscle cars stored. And I just have it running. I'm doing some other things while I'm kind of watching it. At one point, I look up and notice that he actually has my first car. Not a car like it, but my actual first car that I used to own, that I owned from high school all the way up until probably about 15 years ago. I had it the time I was in the Navy. That's why I'm wearing my Navy cruise jacket from the 90s, from the 1995 Westpac on the USS Abraham Lincoln. So if any of you are on that ship, I was on that ship too. And so basically, I'm going to go into the history of where I found. I'm going to put the link to the video where I found the car. I'm not watch the video yourself. If you fast forward to about 8 minutes and 17 seconds, just look for the green Pontiac Tempest, and that's my old car. It is the actual car. So I'm going to go into the history of me with this car and kind of how it wound up in Illinois from California. So basically, growing up, I was always into classic cars. My dad was into classic cars. I got really into muscle cars for a while. I used to get like Hot Rod magazine when I was a kid. This is before I was even old enough to drive. And I always wanted like a cool like GTO or like a Chevelle or a Camaro or something like that. In fact, my dad actually had a 66 GTO that he bought new back then. And he had to give it up when he went in the Army because he got drafted in the Army back in the late 60s and didn't know that they would hold his payments. So he actually gave the car back to the bank because he couldn't make the payments while he was in the Army. Apparently, he special orders like a triple black 66 GTO convertible. I don't have any pictures of the car, unfortunately. So this is about 1990, I believe it was. We actually went over to my grandmother's in West Hollywood to pick her up, to take her out from, or to, basically to go over there for Mother's Day, which is ironic because this past weekend was just Mother's Day. And we're over there, and across the street, this lady's pulling the car, the 66 or the 68 Pontiac Tempest, out of the driveway, and and her son and daughter were taking pictures of it. I went over and asked her, so what's up with the car? And she says, well, we're actually going to sell it. The old lady had actually bought the car new back in 1968, and they were ready to sell the car. So basically, we wound up buying the car. Basically, I was 15 years old. I didn't even have a driver's license at that point. I just had money I saved up. Bought the car, and even took my driving test in that car. And passed. So apparently I'm a pretty good driver, and I always have been. Um, let's see here. My mother actually did a lot of work in the studios as an extra, and anytime they would get a call for like a late 60s car, she would use my car and give me the money that she got extra for renting the car out to the studios. It was actually in a few episodes of Quantum Leap back in the day, if you remember that show, because they did a lot of period piece shows. I think they were all period pieces on that show. So that was in that movie, or that TV show. It was my first car. Let's face it, I drove it really, really hard. I think everybody, they get their first car and they beat the living hell out of it. Especially since it looked like a GTO. I spent a lot of my money I made fixing it. I think I did the transmission at one point, brakes, just about everything on that car. One time I even got a flat in the center divider of the 405. Before the carpool lanes were there was actually a divider in a little area, like where you could pull over in the center divider, and it was like cars are whizzing by me at 70, 80 miles an hour, and I had to change a tire. And I had radial tires on it, and all I had was a bias ply spare, so that made it really fun trying to get home after that. Let's see here. So after high school, which I did drive it through high school, people who I went to high school with would definitely remember me for that car. I was parked a few years. I went in the Navy. First, I went to Illinois. I actually bought like a really crappy Lincoln that I had for about a year Even drove that thing to Virginia. It was like a Lincoln. I had a Mark V, and then later on I had a Lincoln Mark IV, like a '73 Mark IV. Drove that one to Virginia. I had it when I was in school there. Didn't bring it back to California. It probably wouldn't have made it. The thing was like belching smoke. But I actually, when my ship was, USS Abraham Lincoln was in Alameda, California, up in the Bay Area. I didn't take the car up there, but at one point they were getting transferred. It was getting transferred to Washington State. So I decided to come down to LA, drive the car up to Alameda, and then later on I'd be driving the car up to Washington State. I actually got to Pleasanton. This is kind of a weird story. I get to Pleasanton coming into the Bay Area, and I started smelling like a smoke. So it started smelling really weird. So I pulled over. I thought maybe the car was overheating. It wasn't overheating. I looked it over. I couldn't find anything. I got back in it, drove it all the way to Alameda to the base, parked it. Next day I get up, I go out to start the car. I go like a few blocks off the base, and the steering goes out. And it would turn. You have to turn a few turns before it would start turning. I actually limped it to the first auto shop I could find. And what had happened was the turn signal switch actually got a short in it. Melted the turn signal switch, and it actually melted the ball for the tilt wheel, which is why it wouldn't steer. So I actually had to get the whole steering column rebuilt, and I had to find an NOS turn signal switch, since they didn't make turn signal switches for those back then. They may make them now, for all I know. They make a lot more stuff for those cars now than they did back then. But I had to call a guy that specialized like in NOS Pontiac parts and get the turn signal switch. And I remember it was kind of expensive even back then. And then I actually drove the car from Alameda after it was fixed all the way up to Washington State. So while I was up there, I took it to a bunch of car shows, and I got this whole bright idea. I mean, it was a decent looking car, but it had showed its age. It had a really horrible paint job on it from years prior. I got this bright idea that I was going to redo the car. I had no idea what I was doing with cars back then. I took it apart. I basically got it painted. I think I got it painted like Mako or one of those. It was still a cheap paint job, but it would probably look better than what I had. I took the bumpers off and a lot of the chrome and took it over to a place that everyone recommended to get like really high quality show chrome done, and got the bumpers redone. And I put the bumpers back on, and I never really quite put the whole thing back together. And it was kind of like the interior was kind of like not really put in, and all this other. I think I didn't put the door panels back on. I was going to put like reproduction GTO door panels on it, because the original ones were cut for stereo speakers, and they didn't repop Tempest door panels and all this stuff. They don't make anything for Tempest unless it's like interchanges with GTO, but as any of you guys who mess with Pontiacs probably know that. Even when I had the back seat out of it, I even, a lot of people know me as a scooter guy. I actually, when I brought home my second scooter, which was a 1964 Vespa 90, I actually brought it back to where I was living, in the back, where the back seat would go in that car. It actually fit in there, a whole Vespa scooter. So that's kind of an interesting story of something I did in that car. Then when I got out of the Navy, I actually U-hauled a bunch of my stuff back to LA, and I got one of those U-Haul trailers and put it on there and hauled it back to LA. When I got back to LA, it just sort of sat in my mother's driveway. At that point, I'd put when I was in Washington State, I put the Krager wheels on it, and the BF Goodrich radials, because it originally had the original grandma hubcaps on it, which I didn't think were cool enough. Kind of sat in my mom's driveway. At some point, I moved it over to my dad's place. He had a warehouse where he kept like a lot of cool old cars and stuff. Pretty much by the time I got out of the Navy, I got into like Edsels and Fairlanes and a lot of late 50s, early 60s cars, not really muscle cars. I kind of got more into like the finned cars and stuff like that. And I mean, the car just sat there. I never really got around to fixing up the car, and it kind of almost really wasn't, what I was into at the time. So it just sat there. And then my dad loved to give tours of his collection to people he would run into people at the cruise night at Bob's Big Boy in Burbank on Friday night. People would come over, look at his cars. Some people from Illinois were looking at his cars, saw the Pontiac, and said, well, hey, we'd like to buy that. So he called me. He says, they want to buy your Pontiac. I said, well, I don't know if I really want to sell it. It was my first car, whatnot. And he says, well, you got all these really nice 50s cars. He's like, you're not really getting to it. Why don't you just sell it? It'll clear up a space here. And he basically talked me into selling the car, which I kind of always regretted. But yeah, at the time, I see why I sold the car. I had my scooter shop at the time. I was busy with that. I really didn't have a lot of time where I could have put a car like that back together. So that's pretty much how it wound up. The people who bought it were from Illinois, and I do remember that. I never remembered who it was or anything like that. After I sold them the car, I was kind of saddened because they said they were going to make a GTO out of it, because the car, they only made 3,518 68 Pontiac Tempest convertibles. That's being one of them. I'm sure most of them have wound up being turned into GTOs. I mean, it's kind of a unique car because you don't see the Tempests or the Le Mans as much anymore, since they were all pretty much converted into GTOs. So that kind of made me a little sad, but I'd already sold the car at that point, so there's really nothing I could have done. I mean, if they probably would have told me that up front, I probably would have never sold the car, to be honest with you. And I actually took the original black license plates off the car, and they're like, where's the plates? And I'm like, I took them off. They're like, well, we want them. So I gave them the original black license plates with the car, I guess in case they ever sold it. So I was going to keep them as sort of like a souvenir, but didn't get to. So the car went to Illinois. So this is a couple weeks ago. I'm actually, as I said before, I'm on YouTube, the recommended video by Auto Archeology, which I'll link to in the description again. Pops up. Once again, it's at about 8 minutes and 17 seconds. And I'm watching it, and I mean, I'm telling you, this car looks exactly how it did when I sold it. Like, nothing has been done to this car. That's how I know it's my car. I even rattle canned the grill, like with cheap, like hardware store silver spray paint, because back then I had no idea what I was doing on this thing. I should have just left the grill like original. So that was, I mean, it's definitely 100%. I'm absolutely sure this is my old car. So I left the guy a comment in the video and on his Instagram page, and even sent him an email. He got back to me saying that he was going to look into seeing if they were going to sell the car. I guess they even said in the video they want to sell the car, but they want to sell it with another GTO to basically make one good GTO out of two cars, since the GTO, I guess, is pretty rusty. And the car I sold them, the Pontiac Tempest, has no rust since it's been in California up until the point when I sold it. Kind of my feelings about this. A lot of my friends said, well, Mike, do you want your car back? Are you going to try to get your car back? And there was actually a green 68 Tempest convertible on Craigslist, I'd say about 3 or 4 months ago. And it wasn't a bad price. It was actually a decent price. And I could tell that one wasn't my car, but I didn't call him that one because I was like, do I really want another one? And I'd always wondered, well, if I found the actual one, would I really want it back? And I guess now I'm really finding out. I think I'd take this one back. If it was cheap enough, I don't think they're going to sell it to where I can afford it anyway, because, I mean, they want to sell with the rare GTO, which obviously when it's done is going to be a pretty high dollar car. And, realistically, I'm not going to go back to being 25 years younger if I buy this car, or 100 pounds lighter. It's not going to happen. So there's that. I mean, it's not going to take me back to the old days, if you know what I mean. And it really doesn't help. I actually just bought a 1959 Plymouth station wagon project. Realistically, it's kind of more my style anyway, the Plymouth wagon, because it's got fins and it's a station wagon, and it's kind of funky. So I'm kind of excited about that. I don't have that car yet. My friend Jimmy's supposed to go pick that up for me and store it at his place till I can get around to it. But I mean, I've got other projects. It's not like I don't have other cars. But I mean, it would be cool to have a chance to go fix what I did wrong on that car, which was probably a lot, and to put it back on the road. It would actually make for a really kick-ass story, I think, for me to get my old car back. And fix it back the way it should be and take it out and show it off. But I don't know. It is what it is. Kind of waiting to see. Never heard back if they wanted to sell the car on its own, and I'm kind of expecting that they don't want to sell it on its own. Even if I did get it, I'd have to get it back here from Illinois, which would be an issue. But you know, so tell me what you think. Leave a comment. If you like my video, subscribe. I got other car videos on here. And I'm Mike Frankovich, and thanks for watching my little video about my old car.